In this clip, I'll explain how you can get more out of your gear by manipulating MIDI. And if you've seen this channel in the past, this is how I created quite a few of the other hacks, like playing melodies with samples on the circuit, turning the Electribe into a 3-oscillator synth, adding CC to CV functionality to the BeatStep Pro. All of these things can't be done on those machines out of the box, but by intercepting MIDI messages and changing them in real time, what I call MIDI hacking, you might be able to get new functionality out of your existing gear. To demonstrate that, I took the Analog 4 and developed a MIDI hack that will let you play 2 notes paraphonically on each of its 4 tracks. Now, the Analog 4 is an amazing 4-voice synth that I highly recommend, and it can play 4 sounds on each of its tracks. And here I showed you different sounds. If you want, you can also take the same sound and play it across the 4 tracks, and that way you get up to 4 voices of the same sound. But here I've intentionally limited myself to using just 1 track. So it's called polyconfig and it's off, and all the tracks are muted. So throughout this demo, I'll only be using the 1 track, track 1. So theoretically, when it's set up like this, you should only be able to play 1 note per track. Let's check it out. So on the internal keyboard, only 1 note indeed can be played at a time on this track, but on this one, so now I'm essentially playing 2 notes on track 1, which means I have my 3 other tracks to play 3 additional notes or voices. So now it's sort of like an Analog 5, and you could do this on each track, so potentially you could go up to 8 paraphonic notes, 2 on each track. Now, obviously it's not an Analog 5 or an Analog 8. Let me show you this on a different preset to explain what exactly is going on. And here again, on the internal keyboard, we can only play 1 note at a time. And there's a little change I make to oscillator 2 to make it not track according to oscillator 1. And it works here, of course, as well, and 3 other voices are still free. So what exactly is going on here? What's happening is that the right side of the keyboard is playing oscillator 2 on voice 1, and the left side is playing oscillator 1. Now it sounds simple and trivial, but it's not something the device lets you do today. You can't MIDI map it or MIDI configure it to do that. You can only send 1 note to each track, and the oscillators can either follow that note or stay in one place. And that's what I'm doing with the bottom half of the keyboard. Notes are just being sent and played by oscillator 1. But if you look closely at this control right here, you'll see that as I play, it changes. You see what the right side of the keyboard is doing is sending notes to the bone box on the right, and that is translating those notes to control change messages to that knob, to the frequency control of oscillator 2. So this transforms every track on the Analog 4 into a 2-note paraphonic synthesizer, kind of like the Moog Sub 37, only you get 4 of them. Now, all this MIDI manipulation, splitting the keyboard into 2, taking the upper half and converting it to CC messages, is done by this box right here. The box and 3 lines or translators that are running on it. So what is the bone box? It's basically a hub for MIDI that can take MIDI from all sorts of places, like 5-pin DIN in and out, or USB, and you can connect a hub to this and have more coming in through it. It's powered by 5-volt micro USB, and it can also take MIDI through Wi-Fi, wirelessly, or through Ethernet, and can be powered with power over Ethernet as well. Now, it can be a simple MIDI router or USB MIDI host, and you can take any of the inputs and route them to any of the outputs using a web interface without any scripting at all. But what we want to do here is take MIDI from the key step, route it in here to USB, change it, and then route it out through MIDI into the Analog 4. And remember, we needed to take MIDI notes and change it to CC messages that will change this parameter here. So let's take a look at what this script looks like. So this is it, 3 lines like I said. Now, the software we're using to create this is provided by Bohm also. It's called Midi Translator Pro. There's a free trial for it, and you can use it for 20 minutes each time. So you don't need to pay anything to see if this is worthwhile for you and what you want to accomplish. Also, if you don't mind using a computer as your intermediary, you don't need the Bohm box. You can do all of this routing and MIDI manipulations on your computer, whether Mac or PC. So this is the main software interface, and it does a really nice job of explaining in plain English what's going on. These are the three lines. The first two handle the bottom half or the left side of the keyboard, and they basically take note ons, detect an incoming trigger, save its parameters, and then send it out as an outgoing action. The reason we have these two lines is because we want to make sure it only happens below a certain note. So if in this case it's above 50, which is a middle D, the outgoing action will be blocked. The script won't run. Now we're doing the same for note offs. That's sort of like a MIDI thing you need to do. You can't just turn notes without turning them off. Again, we're detecting the note off and using the split. We have a condition here that will block the script for any note above 50. Again, that's D, and you can change that to anything you want. So those are the first two lines of the script. Again, they do nothing but pass notes through from one device to another, from the key step to the analog 4. The only special thing that they do is they split the keyboard and only do it for notes that are below a certain note. Now, the right side of the keyboard is where things get interesting. That's where we want to block any note that I press on the key step, and we want to change it into a MIDI CC message because we actually want to turn the tuning knob on oscillator 2. And that's what line 3 of the script does. This, by the way, is just a label that I put in, but the rest of the columns are populated by the script itself. We take any note on, save its number in QQ, that's a parameter, and then send it out as a control change to CC17, which is the tuning knob of oscillator 2. QQ is a variable that's populated here and then sent out over here. Now, lastly, we want to make sure this happens only above a certain point on the keyboard, above 50, which is again that middle D. So how do you create these lines? It's very simple and menu driven. You just click to see the details. So let's just go through them one by one. You can see the breakdown of the columns over here, and they completely correlate to what's going on over here. And you can just open them one after the other and change menus. So we can detect MIDI messages, a bunch of other things like keystrokes and stuff like that. We'll keep it on MIDI message. Note on is what we want to detect. We're on channel 1. And then we take the note, and to pass it on, you got to store it in a variable. So RR is that variable, and we'll store the velocity as well. Next up is our rules, right? Because we only want to have notes pass if they're above or below a certain number, and this is also menu driven. If it's bigger than 50, then exit and don't execute the outgoing action. So pretty straightforward. And then the outgoing note, if it's okay to send, then send it. Same channel, same note as we collected before. And that's pretty much it for the pass-through, right? So line number 1 is passing note ons. Line number 2, very similar, just passing note offs. And now we get to the meat or the magic of what's going on in this script, which is controlling oscillator 2. So here we also want to capture the incoming note and to save its value, and we're going to do that here in the QQ parameter. And that's how you do it. That's how you capture the value. Now, since I want this to work only on a split part of the keyboard, I need to add a rule where if the note is under 50, which is my split point, then exit. Don't do the outgoing action. And the outgoing action can be any number of things that you see in the menu here. You can move a mouse or a keystroke if you want, but what we want is control change. These are, by the way, all the different MIDI options that you have. And we want to choose CC17 on channel 1. That's where our tuning knob lives. And we're sending the variable, the note variable, as a CC parameter. That is basically it. Now, Bohm have a lot of tutorials on their YouTube channel if you want to dig deeper into programming with Midi Translator Pro. In terms of other products where you can do similar things, the closest competitor that I found is Lemur. That's what I used to create the other MIDI hacks that I talked about before, and that's from a company called Line. It's much more complex to program, and there's a steeper learning curve, but check that out if you want. If you know of any other solutions, by the way, leave a comment below, and I'll add links to any other solutions in the description to this video. Next up, I had a lot of fun playing with this hack, and let me show you a few things you can do with it to expand on the functionality. So this is how it works as before, each oscillator tracking separately. But if you go to oscillator 2 and turn tracking back on, then everything you play with the right hand will be relative to what you play on the left hand. So there are interesting results to be had there. Next up, you can do this with any of the presets practically. Just make sure that as you change presets that the filter is open, right? Because if you're playing higher notes, the filter might be closed and you may not hear them if the filter tracking is set to the note that you're playing, which is the split on the left side. Next tip, I wanted to keep the script simple, so the gate of the note is controlled always by the left hand. You can change it to work in another way, but currently if you try to play a note on the right hand side without pressing something on the left, you won't hear it. You can expand on the script to do that. I'll leave that up to you. Just open the gate when the right side of the split is pressed. Next tip is you can apply modulations to each of the oscillators separately. And that's pretty incredible, even for a paraphonic synth, to have two separate oscillators doing completely different things and playing a different note for each one of them. And remember, you can do this for each and every one of the 4 tracks of the analog 4. So I'll apply an LFO to, let's say, the level of oscillator 2. And if I increase the mod depth, I'll start hearing it. This is sort of like a sidechain effect. But it's only affecting oscillator 2. So oscillator 1, the left side note, is playing the steady note, and the pumping is only on oscillator 2. Let's try a different waveform, maybe a square. Again, only modulating oscillator 2. So that's pretty much it. If you liked it, comment below or ask any questions if you like. Subscribe if you want to see more.